Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Coffin Conversations. It's me, your favorite funeral director. My name is Lauren, and today we have a super special guest. Her name is Laura, and she is an autopsy technician, and she knows everything there is to know about autopsies. She is one of my favorite people to talk to because her and I could talk for hours about death and dying. So welcome, Laura. I'm so excited to have you
Hi,
here.
I know, me too. I always love talking to you. My name is Laura Shea, and I've been an autopsy tech for 5 years, and I did a death investigation for another year. Yeah, I just love forensics. Got my master's in it, and I love sharing the education and all the information about forensics and death and dying and all the different ways you can die.
And that was one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on and make sure that we got this posted to YouTube this time, was because we were talking a little bit before we started recording here about how when her and I were looking into getting into fields about this, especially Laura's job, not enough people talk about what it's like to work where they do autopsies or what it's like to work where at a funeral
Yeah.
home. So I think it's really important to have these conversations and just talk about your job and what you like to do. And with death investigation, how closely the funeral home actually does sometimes work the with you as death investigators. So you have a ton of experience, different types of scenes you've been on. You've seen a lot of death. I have also seen a lot of deaths. When I
Yeah.
get to connect with someone and we get to see these and relate on certain circumstances. So tell me a little bit about your job and how you got into doing autopsies.
Yeah. So I was always interested in death and dying. Actually, my grandma owned a nursing home as I was growing up. And so as residents would die, I kind of told my grandma, I was like, Grandma, can I go in there and like see what they look like? And so every time that happened, I would sneak into a room and just kind of like, peek and be curious. And actually a funny story about this. When I was a little girl, my best friend that I worked with at the medical examiner later in life was a funeral director, and he would pick up from my grandma's nursing home back in the 90s. And I was a little kid running around there. And then we became like best friends at the medical examiner's office later on. But I was like, how weird that we were like all connected way prior to this, like 30 years ago. But yeah, I would just sneak in there and kind of peek and be so intrigued with it. And then as I got older, I'm sure you know about like Score and Rotten.com. That was around high school, so I got into that. And then I just loved CSI. And so that was my favorite show. I'd watch it every like day that it was on. And I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. And then I went to school for health science, and then I got my master's in forensics, and then I ended up at the medical examiner on a whim because I happened to have jury duty one day, and the jury duty parking is in the same parking structure as the medical examiner's office. And as the little shuttle's pulling out of the parking, it says, Forensic Science Center. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Let me Google what that is. And so I did, and I saw that they had an opening there, and I didn't really have any prior experience in autopsies specifically, but I had some healthcare experience since leaving high school. I was in the military, and so I've just always been in patient care and all that. And so, yeah, I found that job opening and applied for it and got it. And so I was like, how crazy that that just kind of worked out that way. And then I really loved what I was doing. And then I went on to be a death investigator, and that's just more going out to the scenes and just kind of more travel and stuff and the actual crime scenes. And so, yeah, I just really loved science and forensics and all that stuff and the legal aspect too. I part of my degree is criminal justice, so I kind of merged the two since I was pretty young. Yeah.
So do you have a associate's? Do you have a bachelor's degree?
So I have a bachelor's in health science and criminal justice, and then a master's in forensics. But when I applied for the job at the medical examiners, I didn't have my bachelor's yet. I was still in the process of it. And with kids and stuff, it took me like 10, 11 years to finish my bachelor's. Um, yeah, I just kind of got it based on my medical experience and my trauma and emergency medicine experience, um, and just my knowledge. Like they asked for anatomy and science and those kind of credits. So I had all that stuff. And yeah, so I just basically got this far on my experience and not so much on my education, which came after, like 4 years into the job is when I finally finished my bachelor's.
I love the part where that you said that you were around the nursing home and you wanted to
Yeah,
just take a peek and like see what the death was
yeah.
about. And I really like that you have that memory because I don't remember the first person that I saw that had died. And I know this is going to sound super weird to people, but I think that's actually a really special memory for you to
Hmm.
have. Because growing up in the funeral home, I remember my dad doing embalmings and I would play in the casket room, or my sisters and I would play tag in the chapel. And that was what we would do to pass time. And here you are spending your childhood in the nursing home. So it's like we were
Hmm.
kind of related and in parallel universes. They were just a little bit different.
Yeah.
And how that brought you to where you are today and what you do. And I just don't believe in coincidences. So
Hmm.
I fully believe that you're doing what you're meant to do. And also, I want to say that I love the part where you said that you were into CSI because I too was also into CSI. And
Uh-huh.
it's it's funny that you say that because here you are and you did the death investigation, which is basically CSI, as you see,
Yeah, it really
because
is.
people don't realize how much death investigators slash medical examiners slash coroners in a lot of places, it's all the same job title. If you don't
Right.
know, now you do. So you do all of that, and you are the head person at the scene, and you decide if a death looks suspicious or if the family has concerns or if there's no medical history, and you can call in the CSI team, the whole death investigation team, and then that's when things get pretty serious. So it's just when you said that you love CSI, my heart like went out to that because I also love that show, and
Hmm.
it also influenced me. I would come home from high school every day and I would turn on the reruns from
Yep.
the CSI. I'd also watch. This is totally off topic. But the House Bunnies, the
Me
Girls
too.
Next Door, Girls Next Door, because
Yes.
it was on. It was
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Spike.
I loved it. It was like
Yeah,
a nice reprieve, you could watch it and kind of like wash away the crime scene. So,
yeah. So you're super
yeah.
depressed and like weirded out that death happens, and and all these crazy ways that people die, and then the Girls Next Door would come on, and you'd be like, oh, all right,
I'm
we're talking
happy
about Hugh.
now.
I'm happy now. We're going and having cocktails by the pool
Yeah.
with Hugh Hefner and doing photo shoots. So it's like two different, totally
Right.
different lives, and just made you feel a little bit happier, so you could go to bed and sleep at night.
Yes. It was like a little refresher.
Yeah, like a little refresher. So how long have you been doing the death, and have you ever counted all the years you've been doing this?
Altogether would be, I'd say, 6 or 7 years, I think, in there. I started in 2016, so I don't want to think how long ago that was, but yeah.
Yeah, and you've kind of been around death and dying your whole life with being around the nursing home
Yeah.
and everything. So it's kind of hard
Yeah,
to put a
exactly.
year on it because you've just been exposed to it your whole life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way
Um,
to look at it.
so common questions I get asked always. It'll be in the live, it'll be in the comments. They'll say, "What's the worst case you've ever gotten?"
Mm.
And I wanted to ask you that, but more so, I wanted to ask you, like, what's the craziest autopsy that you've seen? But before I get into that, I, I'm going to come back to that because I think it's important to talk about what do you do as an autopsy technician or as an assistant, or what does your job consist of?
Okay, so it's basically assisting the doctor during the autopsy. That's the main chunk of it, but there's also the other stuff behind the scenes that you don't really think of. When a body would come in, we would be the one to x-ray them if they needed x-rays, like in a homicide or a car accident or a work accident or a babies, they would all need x-rays. So we would do the x-rays and then we would prepare the bodies, undressing them, typing in the computer their belongings that they have, um, and keeping track of their money and all of the things that they have on their person, emptying their pockets, keeping track of their jewelry, and kind of just inputting that in the computer. Also, collecting the evidence during the autopsy. So, if we had to take a sexual assault kit, gunpowder residue, nail clippings or swabs, all that kind of stuff, we would collect and package and sign our name to, because that's going to be seen in court later. And then we would retain the evidence if it didn't get released right then at autopsy with the detectives. Sometimes they don't come. So we would retain that evidence, lock it away, and then just kind of closing them up after the autopsy. There was like one or two doctors that only cut their own cases. So there would be like one or two that would do the entire autopsy themselves. But besides that, then it was just us techs. We were completing the autopsy start to finish, doing the Y incision, taking the brain out. Sometimes we would take the testes out. And then we just put it off to the side for the doctor, and they would do their sections. They would section the organs and look at them more closely. And then sometimes they take little pieces out to put in histology and look at them under the microscope later. And then we would close up the bodies and then kind of zip them up and clean the bag off and put them back in the cooler. And this really wasn't my department, but sometimes we were cross trained to also intake the bodies and release the bodies um, that we had in our facility. And then, yeah, as a death investigator, I was in a smaller county, so they were also basically slash autopsy tech, but then also going to the scenes, taking the calls and determining whether or not the medical examiner is going to take jurisdiction or not, making a determination if we're going to show up to the scene or not, because showing up to the scene wasn't always mandatory. If it was just a clear cut, nothing wrong, but we still had to take jurisdiction, then we didn't really have to go out there. But if it was, a baby case or homicide, or like one time I had a person that had died in a semi crash and he was the driver. And so I had to go out to the scene because it was work related, because he was working during that accident. And, requesting medical records from the doctors. Sometimes we'll take jurisdiction over a case and we need the medical records to see if they have any prior history to determine a cause of death that maybe they wouldn't need an autopsy, or we would just decline the person but then still ask for medical records to just sign it out. And so that was just the doctor signing the death certificate without them having to come through the office. And a lot of talking with families, working with detectives at the scenes, afterwards, trying to coordinate evidence or their police report, getting their police report, and a lot of writing reports and um, answering phone calls and all that. So, yeah.
Death investigation, as thorough as it gets, from
Hmm.
start to finish. I don't think many people realize how much investigation can go into something as, I want to say, as simple as a car accident, but most car accidents are
Hmm.
not simple. What I mean by that
Right.
is it might look like something obvious where, oh, it's a car accident. But then we have to have the death investigator come out. Then we have to have state patrol, highway patrol come
Hmm.
out. They have to map the crash. You have to call the family, locate the next of kin. It's a lot. And depending on what county you're in or how far you go from the office, because certain medical examiners' offices will cover multiple counties in some states, how far you have to drive. Did your, does your office where you work, do they, this is another thing that people talk about a lot. I will talk about doing, I'll say, oh, I went on a corner call. So I'll say that,
Hmm.
I went on the death scene, and they're like, well, wait a minute, you're the funeral director. Why are you going on the death scene? And I will explain to them that even though I'm the funeral director, the mortician, a lot of these smaller counties have contracts with the medical
Hmm.
examiner's office. So the death investigator, medical examiner, will call and say, hey, we have a car accident up here and I need somebody to do the transportation. So my question is, do you do the transportations, or do you call out?
So, yes and no. So here we have a whole separate entity that does the transportation service. So it's like a call center facility thing, 24/7 call center basically. And then they dispatch, like in the smaller counties, there was only like, I'd say like 6 people that worked there that would do that whole county. But the larger counties was way more than that. They had like hundreds of employees, and depending on who was on call, at least 2 people were dispatched to any given scene. But we have a whole transport company that does that. And then usually if we relied on the funeral home to transport any of the bodies, then it would be because we decided to decline the case. So we didn't usually coordinate with the funeral homes to actually pick up our bodies. We had the transport service do that.
Oh,
But the funeral homes were dispatched if we declined the case, and then they would go pick them up. So, yeah, we didn't really coordinate with them for a ride.
I always find it so interesting how different offices or different counties, states, how everybody does it a little bit differently. When you say decline a case, for somebody that might not know what declining a case
Mhm.
means, what does that mean?
So when we take the call and they give us all the information and we decide that it's not going to be a medical examiner case, that is what we would call a decline. So we declined jurisdiction.
So for our county, essentially that would mean like they had a plethora of
Hmm.
medical experience, maybe
Yeah.
multiple heart attacks. They passed away at home, and
Right.
the medical examiner says, we talked to the doctor's office. There's history of heart disease, and there's no reason for an autopsy. Does that mean the same for your office too?
It, yeah, it does. Like if they're on diabetes medication and like Bilal or lisinopril or something like that, then yeah, we that would be that circumstance. So if they have medications that they would be taking because they had a prior stroke or a heart attack, or they have congestive heart failure or COPD, or yeah, anything like that would be the same for us that we would decline over. A lot of medical history and also a doctor that's willing to sign the death certificate.
Did I ever tell you? Oh, by the way, having a doctor signing the death certificate is a really big thing. So
Yes.
signing the death certificate, it's a big job. And so that's a lot of what your office, the medical examiner's office,
Hmm.
and the doctor's office has to decide is who is going to take responsibility and who is going to sign off saying, yes, this is how this person died. I think that's important
Right.
to note.
Yeah,
Um,
and a lot of times we got a lot of pushback from doctors. They're like, well, I have no idea why this person died. Why do I have to sign the death certificate? And it's like, because you were treating them for diabetes, COPD, and heart failure. Like, that's your reason. And they're like, oh, well, I don't know how to do this. It's like, okay, we'll walk you through it, but you have to sign it. Like, that's not, we can't sign it. We just can't.
And now that you say that, you would not believe the doctors that we
Mm-hmm.
have to, we'll have the medical examiner's office be like, no, we're deferring to doctor's office. We have to call the doctor at the funeral home. And we're like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
we've put this death certificate in. We need you to sign it. And the doctor will be like, well, I'm not signing that.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be like, what do you mean? What do you mean you're not signing that? So we have to call the medical
Yeah.
examiner's office. The doctor doesn't want to do it. The medical examiner's office says, no, that we have the medical record history. You call that doctor back and you tell him. So I don't think a lot of people really understand what goes on behind the scenes to make sure we get that death
Mm-hmm.
certificate signed. So then we're calling the doctor. Well, I've never signed on and I've never put in the information in the computer before. Well, don't worry,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Doctor. I will send you the form. You can fill it out. And most of them are online now, but sometimes they're still doing
Yes.
paper forms.
Probably in smaller counties, huh? But
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of times the funeral home would call us and be like, we have tried everything to get this doctor to sign it, and they just absolutely refuse. And so I would have to call doctors and be like, okay, this is how it's going to work. I'm going to tell you, and you're going to go do it. And you're breaking the law if you don't. It like recognized
Yeah,
that.
it
Oh my
did.
God. That is so funny.
It just gave the thumbs
Uh,
up. Like, did you know that when you're FaceTiming someone now, you could do like emojis or
no.
stuff? Yeah, like peace or
Oh,
like
that's so
uh,
cool.
yeah, weird. I wanted to
Yeah.
tell you. I don't know if I ever told you this or maybe you saw it on my TikTok, but I another thing people don't talk enough about. I had a family where dad passed at home, and this man, when I tell you this man was a walking, ticking time bomb, he had
Hmm.
heart disease, he had kidney failure, he was diabetic, he had had two heart attacks, he had history of clotting, he had, you name it, this poor man had everything listed in the book. Medical examiner went out along with the police department because he passed at home and it was really sudden. He gripped his chest, fell to the ground, and that was it. The wife called all of the children. Everybody showed up. By the time I got there, it was a house full of people, and the medical examiner had made the decision that I called the doctor's office. We have enough medical history there. We are declining to consider this a medical examiner's case. This will be the doctor's going to sign off. They feel comfortable to sign the death certificate based on the evidence of his medical history. And so there is no need for an autopsy. And the family freaked out. They wanted the autopsy. They said, no,
Hmm.
we need to know how dad died. I need you
Yeah.
to do this autopsy. Well, when the medical examiner's office declines, then the county's not taking responsibility. So then where that falls back onto is actually the family. So
Hmm.
the medical examiner, they walk away. They're like, nope, I'm so sorry, but we have the medical history. The doctor says, yes, we've completed our job, our little investigation, and they're gone. So then the funeral home, the family says, we want a private autopsy. So I then call the medical examiner's office back because we really only have one that services our big, large area. And we
Hmm.
say the family wants a private autopsy. And they're like, well, it's going to be $2,000 made payable to the medical examiner's office. And they're going to have to pay that first before the autopsy is complete. So I called the
Hmm.
family. They were not happy about the price, but they paid it. And then I called medical examiner's office and they were pissed. They were pissed. They're like, I showed up there and the lady gave me a bunch of attitude. And I'm like, have I offended you? Like, what's going on? And she's like, no, it's just this man has so much medical history. I cannot believe that you could not convince the family that this was unnecessary. And I looked at the
Well,
lady.
sometimes you can't.
I said, I'm sorry, but this is what they wanted. I'm literally just doing what the
Hmm.
family asked of us to do for them, what they wanted for their dad. And when I talked to the family, they said, we want to know what our dad died of. I know he had all these things. We want the smoking gun. We want to know what it was that took his life. We don't want a generic answer on the death certificate. We want
Mhm.
what it was. So I handed the lady the check. She looked at me and she goes, well, you can tell the family thank you for their donation to blah, blah, blah county.
Yeah, in our state, we don't mix business and pleasure. Like that would be a like conflict of interest. So you can't get a private autopsy through the county. So the county, if they decline jurisdiction, that's it. That's absolutely it. The county is out. There is no more county in that situation. And then we direct the families to contact a private pathologist themselves, or sometimes the funeral home will help them reach out to a private pathologist, but you Google private autopsy, private pathologist, private forensic pathology, and then you pay that forensic pathologist directly. And yeah, that's all separate from the county, totally different entity. And even with this medical examiner, the family's paying for it. So that's why you're doing it. Who cares if she wasn't convinced that her dad had some generic disease or whatever, but they were paying for that private autopsy. So you get your $2,000 and shut up.
I still one I want to say I love that point of view actually, and I wish I would have known that at the time because that makes a whole bunch of sense. That makes like too much
Hmm.
sense that you would then, okay, well, we did the investigation, you should have an outward opinion on this because we already did this, this is what we found, find somebody
Hmm.
else unbiased. Now looking back, that's a great point of view to have. The person at the medical examiner is like, well, thank you for their donation. The reason that they said that was they were coming at me acting like I hadn't done my job and said, well, did you tell them that if we do the autopsy and we find nothing, if we find no clot, if we find no stress on the heart or anything like that, we will just divert to his biggest medical condition that he had,
Hmm.
that he suffered from the longest. So whether that was kidney failure, whether that was heart failure, whether that was whatever it was, the diabetes, that's what will go down if we find nothing. They did the autopsy, they didn't find anything, and that's what resulted on the death
Yeah, well,
certificate.
and even still, at that point, it's the medical examiner's responsibility to speak to the family and next of kin and tell them that. So that's on them, you know.
Knowing what I know now, what's so funny about it's not what's
Sometimes you wish
interesting
you could go back.
and what's interesting about what we do as a career, a lot of it you learn on the spot.
Hmm. Yeah.
Your mentors, they can really only teach you so much and then they just throw you in there and they're like, well, this is how I learned. And
Yep.
that's how you're forced to learn because that's what the whole funeral service, probably the same for where you work too. Like, yep, we just figure it out as we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, it was a lot of throwing in and just sink or swim.
Sink or
A
swim.
lot. Yeah. Well, because a
So,
lot of the situations you don't encounter ever before that, so there's always like every other day was like something new. Something it's the same but different and always some kind of new situation, which is another reason why I like it so much. It's the same but different. So
it's
different
different
every
every
day.
day. So, tell me about one of the wildest cases or wildest causes of
Mm.
death that you've seen that probably
Hmm.
deserved a spot on A Thousand Ways to Die.
Let's see. Because there's a few. The one that I'll start with is this was probably like, I was probably like a year in. I was still kind of a baby. And we had this guy that was working, doing like landscaping stuff. And he's throwing wood into a wood chipper.
No.
And
Oh no.
yeah, and there's like a string on the wood or something, and it attaches to him, and he gets sucked into the wood chipper. And the whole worst thing about it is that it was all caught on CCTV. So whatever business he was working at caught it on video. And so we had to watch the whole thing. The cops brought the video for us and we had to watch it for that case. And you just see him get sucked in, but not quickly. It was slow and he knew that it was coming and you can just see him like fighting for his life. So yeah, that like is seared into my brain. I got that. There's a lot of videos that I've seen, um, from the evidence of the cops. But then another crazy story, like a little trigger warning because it involves kids. This guy, the dad, had killed his baby son and also shot the mother and then himself. And so the mom actually survived this, and she was in the house for days, probably before anyone even knew. Because by the time we got the dad and the baby, they were probably like 3 days like decomposed. So but the mom survived and she was shot in the head, but it went like through and through this way, so behind the eyeballs, and her
Wow.
eyes were protruding and like bulging out, and they were just like full of blood. And and the only reason I know this is because the cops were sent to the hospital to take photos of her for our pathologist so that he could examine her gunshot wound to find out if hers was self-inflicted or if it was not self-inflicted, to determine if her story matched up with the evidence and all that stuff. So the cops went to the hospital to take a photo of her wounds, and basically all of her, and then brought it back for us, and we were looking at those. It turned out that they were not self-inflicted on her, so she was shot by the dad and the boyfriend or whoever he was, I can't remember. But yeah, so he did that to them, and now she was wandering around the house basically blind for 3 days. And on the last day that she was in the house, she finally found her baby because she's just feeling around the whole
Oh.
house trying to find a phone. She couldn't find a phone. So she's just wandering like aimlessly.
And probably
She finds
suffering
it.
from blood loss and
Yeah, lost. She's so confused. She like
yep.
barely knows what's going on. And she finally finds the baby and then kind of like realizes what had happened there, and then finds the phone and was able to call 911. But I think that was probably another crazy thing because she was shot through and through to the head, like from one temple to the other, totally survived it, had recollection to retell the story, was able to remember everything. And unfortunately, she lost her baby, but she also lost her eyesight. But it's crazy the amount of trauma you can go through and totally survive that and have almost no brain damage after that. So I thought that was just like that's one of the fascinating things that you kind of find out along the way, is just crazy things like that. And it's just very cool, actually. And I don't mean to be like mean or cold, but it is very cool to see stuff like that that's not very, yeah. So,
It's interesting to see what the human body can survive when put through trauma.
hmm yeah, especially with all the adrenaline and injuries and all that stuff. You go through crazy stuff and still come out the other side sometimes and yeah, survive.
So I gotta know about the guy with the wood chipper.
hmm
So when he was getting pulled into the wood chipper, do you remember what extremity or like where it was pulling that it was slow mo? Do you remember?
Yeah, well, I think he was getting pulled in like like arms first because he was throwing it in, and I think it caught the string or the rope that was still
Maybe on his
attached to the
like
wood. And so it was just kind of like pulling the rope. And so that kind of gave him a little more time because there was some slack on it. But yeah, and then you just see like one shoulder go in first, and then after he gets to it, then you see um the inside of the wood chipper just go with all the blood and all that stuff once he gets to the blades.
So this is really, really morbid, and I'll probably most definitely cut this out. I'm not sure yet. When the transporter got to the scene, did they just scoop what they could? Was there any bone matter? What was in the body bag when you open that up to look for the...
Yeah. So basically, because there have been times like you deal with a person getting hit by a semi
Yep.
or a pedestrian of any kind, really, or just something really forceful and traumatic, it leaves, like, especially going running over something, it kind of just sears that into the concrete and flattens it and just like, there's pieces everywhere. And so, there was this time that I was cleaning up a scene and taking the body from someone that had jumped out in front of a semi. And it's just picking what you can find
Yep.
and just as much of it as possible. Because, obviously, we don't want to leave anything behind, but unfortunately, sometimes it's inevitable. Like the scene that I had of the pedestrian versus semi, there were some things I know I was leaving behind because this guy, from his driver's license, said he was about like 200 pounds. But then I get this body back to the medical examiner's office and he's only like 98 pounds. So I know there was like muscle and tissue and all kinds of things that were left out there. And I actually said something to the police officer, the DPS out there. I was like, oh, hi, I hope I'm grabbing everything. That would be horrible come daylight. And, there's like all these pieces that I missed. And he's like, I don't even worry about it because whatever is left, the birds will just get to it by morning. So then it got me thinking, like, okay, well, how many roads am I driving on where there's like some pieces of tissue off the side of the road that just, got eaten by a bird after an accident or something. So yeah, I was like, that's a wild thought.
Yep. Yep. I've had some where the fire department will come out with the big fire trucks and they'll wash the whole pavement down and just
Hmm.
push it off to the side because we cannot collect every drop of blood. It's literally impossible. We also will do our damnedest to find every part of that person, but there might be bone fragments we might not find. Some things just go poof. I mean, and I know that sounds crazy, like scientifically, to be like, oh, it goes poof, but sometimes it really does. And there's no finding it because it's like finding a needle in a haystack. It,
Exactly.
I had a guy take his life on like New Year's Eve. And we had to go to the house, and me and the medical examiner, the death investigator, looking at each other, and there was matter all over the ceiling. And we're like, what do we do? And so we bagged his body, tagged the body, and we went into the kitchen and got spatulas. I don't keep spatulas in my removal van, but we had to get
It's
spatulas
not one of
because
your tools.
it's not one of the death tools. So we were scraping the ceilings with the spatulas. And that's just one of the things nobody talks about. And did we have to
Hmm.
do that? No. But we were thinking of the family and just thinking like, it might take us 30 extra minutes to maybe scrape the ceiling and try to get what we
Hmm.
can. But it was a popcorn ceiling. We couldn't even get everything. So you have to then
Yeah.
call the family and tell them you're going to want to call a crime scene cleanup crew, or you're not going to want to come in here, or find somebody that can handle something like this. It's a phone call you don't want to make, but unfortunately, sometimes you just can't pick up every piece.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really unfortunate. And unless you've lost somebody in that kind of way, you really have absolutely no idea. That is something that happens when a death occurs, especially if it's a gunshot wound of high caliber and shotgun wounds. And those, it's a very, very messy scene. And it is absolutely 100% the family's responsibility to clean that up. We unfortunately don't do that, and neither do the police officers and all that. So yeah, the family either has to clean it themselves or hire and pay for a crime scene cleanup crew. And which is just awful that those places exist to get people's money. Honestly, sometimes I feel that way, but I know that they have to exist, but yeah, the family is responsible for the cleanup, and that is, I feel so bad for them, honestly.
I am saying this now because I wanted to do an episode talking about how crime scene cleanup isn't totally regulated in how much they can charge and what they can charge. Like there's not somebody going out and enforcing what these crime scene cleanup crews what they're really doing. And I've had
Right,
families come to me and they're like, "Oh, I had to pay $5,000. I had to pay $10,000 for them to come and gut my whole house out
right.
and clean up." It's just, again, one of those things that's not really talked about. And I'm making a note right now mentally, like while we're here talking, that's one of the things I really wanted to deep dive into a little bit because it's just people don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And um, it's the same here. I've actually never encountered a crime scene cleanup um, like organization or company, but I've heard from families also that they get charged an arm and a leg as well. The more mess that it is, they could, they aren't even consistent across the board. So like they could charge $5,000 for one gunshot wound cleanup and then charge $2,000 for another. And so there's no consistency, there's no
No.
regulations. Then they can charge whatever they want and whatever they feel like. Um, Honestly, I am noticing the same thing with like donor cadavers and stuff. They're the same way. Like there's only so many institutions that will provide donor cadavers to medical schools and stuff. And they are starting to become a monopoly and charge an astronomical amount for these bodies that they get for free. Where
Oh,
that money can be made in the death industry, and if there's no like regulations or anyone's really watching them, they will absolutely gouge your eyes out.
that's another rabbit hole I'm going to go down now because where
Yep.
I went to mortuary school, we were a part of the medical school program. So
Mhm.
we had a very well run program that the donors, um, they were very strict on what we called the people that donated their bodies. We were not allowed to call them cadavers. They were donors. The donors donate their
Mhm.
bodies. They are given a free cremation at the end of it and then given back either to the family if they specify, or else it was a mass cremation and then, but I did not realize that there would be, which it makes sense now that you say that there would be a secondary
Mhm.
company that collects the donors
Yep.
and then sells them to the medical school
Yeah.
program. And that makes me sick.
Yeah, and they are all given to that institution based on the people's wishes. They want, hey, I want my body to go to science. And so they get donated, and then these companies are charging the medical schools like I know one personally that's charging like $400,000 for a handful of donors. It's just kind of sad because these are our next generation doctors or dentists or mortuary students and nursing students. And it's going to be harder and harder to find cadavers for them to learn on and while they're going to school and stuff. And so yeah, they charge up the butt, and they kind of screw the students out of their experience because then it just forces schools to downsize or maybe just resort to fake cadavers because that's a thing too. They have fake, like synthetic cadavers that are starting to become popular now because of the price of real ones. So I think even in the future, it's going to be harder to kind of teach the next generation with the way things are going in that department.
You know, it's wild. We had so many people that wanted to donate that the school was selective in who they would pick. They wanted
Really.
weight between a certain weight, and if you were over, they might take you. If you were over 350 pounds, they might not. And we might have a random embalming where the person's over 350, and in that case, it was really interesting for us as students to be like, this is what we do, because really we only got between all of us students, we really didn't have that many people that we could embalm in.
Hmm.
Um, but that's
Yeah.
interesting to say that there's the synthetic or the other ones from work. I mean, we had an influx of people that were like, free cremation. Let's go.
Yeah, that's the perk of it, right? Um
I feel like they should be
but
given
yeah.
more. If we're charging $400,000 per cadaver, I feel like the
Yeah.
family should
Well,
get a
it
little
was,
kickback.
yeah, it's like total for like 40 of them. So I guess it's like, you know, what, like 44,000 a piece or something, or I don't know. I
Or
don't math. I'm
4,000 a
not a
piece.
math
So for
girly.
40 of them.
Yeah, so yeah, it's crazy. Um, I zoned out there.
That's okay. You don't know why? Because we're going on 54 minutes. So I
Yeah.
should probably find a way to like wrap it up. And then we're going to have you back again because they're going to have a ton of questions and it's going to be so much
Yeah, for a
fun. And then
part due.
every time we talk, it's so great.
I know, I love it.
I want to ask you where people that are watching, where can they follow you? So if they have questions about what you do, they can ask you.
Yeah, so basically right now I just kind of throw in videos up on TikTok every now and then. I haven't done a whole lot recently, so it's been super crazy busy, but my TikTok is that autopsy chick, and that's pretty much all that I put content on is there, because I kind of forget about Instagram and all that stuff. So, but if they want to check out my Instagram, it's the same, that autopsy chick. But yeah, that's what I'm doing.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And again, we are going to have to do this again, because like a multiple part autopsy technician Tuesdays or something, because
Yeah.
I know you have so many stories and we didn't even get into the spooky stories. So we're gonna
Oh
do this again
man.
really soon.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that.
That's okay. That's okay. Because we'll just do it again.
Yes. Oh,
Right. Well, thank you. Oh, is it going to give the thumbs up
I
again?
thought so, but not this time. There
Oh,
we
it
go.
did
Oh,
for
I got
me.
fireworks.
Ooh.
That's a good way to end it. Some fireworks. The finale.
Okay. Yeah, the finale. All right.
Uh,
Well, thank you so much. And we'll
thank
catch you
you.
again on another
All
episode
right.
of Coffin Conversations.